All right, welcome to the directions for your converting rational numbers flippable. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about for this flippable is how to convert between percents, fractions, and decimals. You should have two pieces of paper. You should have a bright yellow flippable, and then you should have a white sheet with boxes that you'll need to cut out. Now, this white sheet is split up into two different sections. On the left, it shows you directions on how to convert between fractions, decimals, and percents. So each one of these is a different set of directions depending on what you're trying to convert. On the right side of your sheet, you've got a list of examples. For example, this first one goes from a decimal to a percent. This second one goes from a fraction to a decimal. This one over here on the far right corner goes from a percent to a fraction, so on and so forth. So for each one of these sections, you're going to want to have a set of directions and an example. So the first thing that we're going to do with our flippable is we're going to fold on these solid lines. So we'll fold on the line, and then we're just going to cut on this dotted line. And same thing with the next dotted line. And then you're going to fold on the other side as well. So on the solid line, you'll fold. And then on the dotted lines, you will cut. Now you only want to cut up to that solid line. You don't want to cut any further. Otherwise it'll be messed up. Okay, now you may have noticed that this was printed on bright colored paper. This is so that you remember that this is something that you should really be keeping throughout the year, okay? So the first one that we're gonna look at is, so this is now the front of your foldable, okay? The first one that we're gonna look at is how to go from a percent to a fraction. So what we're gonna do is we're going to look on here for the directions for how to convert from a percent to a fraction. Well, if we look here, this first one, it says rewrite the percent over 100. Well, that's gonna create a fraction, and then we'd wanna simplify that fraction. So this is actually our list of directions that we're gonna use. If you need to go ahead and cut this out, go ahead and pause the video now to cut it out. Now, mine are actually already cut out, so I'm just gonna pull my piece. I'm gonna open up the flap, and then I'm gonna paste this right inside. So we'll paste that right in there like that. And now if I need to look up how to go from a percent to a fraction, I can simply just flip this open and look at these directions. Now the next thing that I want to do is glue an example on the inside of the flap. So in my example sections, I want to look and see which one is going from a percent to a fraction. So if we look here, it's actually going to be the one up here in the corner because it starts out as a percent and it ends as a fraction. If you need to go ahead and cut that out, feel free to pause the video and do that now. Now I have actually already cut up my pieces, so we've already decided that this is going to be our card. So we're going to flip that open and glue that on the inside. Just like that. Okay. Now the next thing is we're going to go from a percent to a decimal. So again, we're going to look at our list of directions. If we're trying to go from a percent to a decimal, it's actually going to be this one because we're going to remove the percent sign, and then we're going to move our decimal on the percent 2 spaces to the left. So go ahead and cut that one out. And then you'll just want to paste it on the inside back cover. And then on the inside of the flap, you're going to want to paste the example. So you're looking for the example that starts as a percent and ends at a decimal. That should look like this right here. 42% in decimal form is 0.42. So you can go ahead and paste that on the inside. We'll go on to the next flap, which is to go from a fraction to a decimal. So we want to look at our direction sheet here. I'm trying to go from a fraction to a decimal. So it's actually just going to be this one. We're just going to divide the numerator by the denominator. I'm going to flip open that flap, glue it right in there. And then I'm going to look for the example that turns a fraction into a decimal. So that's going to be this example right here. And now we want to be able to find how to go from a fraction to a percent. So that's actually going to be this one. We're going to convert the fraction into a decimal by dividing the numerator by the denominator. Then we're going to move that decimal place 2 spaces to the right, and then we're just going to add a percent sign. So flip that flap open, glue it down. And then on the inside of the flap, you're just going to look for your example. So if we're trying to go from a fraction to a percent, we're going to use this example because it goes from a fraction to a decimal to a percent. So I'm going from a fraction to a percent. And we'll glue that on the inside. Next one is to go from a decimal to a percent. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right, and then we're going to add a percent sign. And then we just want to look for the example that goes from a decimal to a percent, so this one, and glue it on the inside. And then this last one, we're looking to go from a decimal to a fraction. So this is going to be our last set of directions. We're going to write the decimal over 100. If it has an integer in the hundredths place, you'll go over 10 if it only has a digit in the tenths place, and then we're just going to simplify our fraction. And the last section that we are doing is how to go from a decimal to a fraction. So the last piece that you should have goes from a decimal to a fraction to a simplified fraction. So we'll glue that in on the inside. Now again, this is a foldable that you're going to want to keep for the remainder of the year. So it's very important that we're able to tell whose is whose. I would recommend putting your name on your foldable right here on the back in big letters. So I would put my name, just so that we make sure that we don't lose it. If you're unsure still of how to use this foldable, for example, what all of these directions mean, don't fret yet. We will be going over this over the next couple days in class. Thanks so much, and see your teacher if you've got any questions.